Let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. Want to remind you to subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on both Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. Also want to remind you to check out, obviously, Inside College Basketball Now on YouTube and like and subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now. We want to get up to 500 likes on this show, and also a programming reminder that Inside College Basketball Now will be coming to you on Mondays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. This next week, we will be on CBS Sports Network both times, and in addition to those shows on Mondays and Thursdays, Inside College Basketball Now will be bringing to you exclusive episodes with some of the biggest and best names in the sport. But with that said, this is a different type of show. This is a show that starts, obviously, a process that we look forward to each and every year. This is a show that is a coronation for the greatest month we have on the calendar. This is March, ladies and gentlemen, and if you are not excited right now, if the air in your tires is not at the maximum level, if you are a person right now that is not ready to do a push-up on a picket fence, then you officially hate fun. This is the month we live for. This is the month why I got into college basketball coverage. And now on March the 1st at 12:10 a.m. Eastern Time, we can start to set the table for what is going to be the greatest 5-week journey that we have on the calendar year. And there's so many different things I'm looking forward to on this particular March, and there are so many different storylines that came to the forefront today in college basketball, and I'm talking about Saturday, February 28th. But the big thing I want to look at first when it comes to March is the opportunity potentially to have St. John's and UConn meet for a third time at Madison Square Garden in the Big East Tournament title game. We saw UConn escape on Saturday against Seton Hall at Gamble Pavilion. Emotional scene for Alex Caravan, emotional scene for Dan Hurley. But now we're in a situation where UConn and St. John's are officially on a collision course to meet in a Big East Tournament title game 2 weeks from tonight at Madison Square Garden. 3 days after St. John's lost by 32 points in Hartford to UConn, St. John's came back and beat Villanova by 32 points at Madison Square Garden. The game wasn't even that close, and it reaffirms that St. John's and UConn are a cut above everybody else in the Big East. Want to remind you as well to leave your comments in the chat right now. We will be in a situation where I'll be going to these throughout the show as we continue to set the table for the greatest month we have on the year. This has been a non-stop day for me. I got to the CBS Broadcast Center just before 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. I am still here now. I still got more TV to do on CBS Sports Network, but you know as well as I do, we sleep in May. Another thing I'm really excited about this month, and I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to follow, is what happens in terms of potential bid stealers for the NCAA tournament. Because I can tell you, and I am somebody now who is continually in a situation where I am tracking what's going on with the NCAA tournament, just as I always do with every single development in college basketball. And we've got, obviously, a lot of developments happening now throughout the sport. But the more and more I see what's going on with the bubble, the more and more perplexed I am about the situation that could ever happen with NCAA tournament expansion. But I think there is a weak bubble this year at the level of softness that we have not seen in quite some time in college basketball. The bubble each and every year, and it feels like it's part of a March tradition, is one that is going to be crucified. The bubble each and every year is one that's a tradition that people are going to poke holes in. But with that said, I think now we have maybe the weakest bubble we have had in a number of years. And I think we are going to see in certain instances a scenario where bid stealers out of certain conferences could come to the forefront. I am specifically looking at the Mountain West. I'm looking at teams like Nevada. I'm looking at teams like Grand Canyon that could be ones that could find a situation where they pluck a bid out of championship week. These are all things that are moving through my mind as I get ready, obviously, to be in a situation to break down what's ahead during the greatest month of the year. Now, one thing that I really, really have a hard time dealing with, and it's very frustrating, is when I see teams that are built to go far in the NCAA tournament, teams that have the requisites to have historical runs, teams that have the requisites to be in a situation where you are thinking this could be a special season, and then these teams go through a massive, massive injury. We saw it a couple of weeks ago with Richie Saunders and BYU. We saw it a couple of weeks ago, obviously, with JT Toppin and Texas Tech. And now I think we are seeing it, not maybe to that degree, but a team that all season long has been one of the favorites to win a national championship, and that's Michigan, suffered a substantial blow, in my opinion, on Saturday when the news came out that LJ Kaysen, Michigan's backup point guard, is going to miss the remainder of the 25-26 season due to a torn ACL. Now, LJ Kaysen, and I have talked about this for the last couple of weeks, LJ Kaysen had separated himself as the best backup point guard in college basketball. And when I had Brad Underwood here on Inside College Basketball Now, prior to Illinois' game against Michigan on Friday night, he reaffirmed the sentiment and said that Michigan was a better offensive team when it went to its bench with LJ Kaysen in the game. LJ Kaysen is a 40% three-point shooter, and now without him, Michigan's nine-man rotation that, if you remember, I've talked about for weeks, was good enough if you looked at the four reserves: Kaysen, Trey McKinney, Roddy Gale, Will Cheddar, and one of Michigan's primary front court guys. Michigan's primary four reserves and one of their bigs, Morez Johnson or Dai Mara, were good enough to go to the NCAA tournament. Now that rotation goes down to 8. Now all of a sudden Michigan does not have a stalwart backup point guard. Now all of a sudden Michigan does not have somebody to give you offense off the bench. And now the pressure becomes that much more obviously immense on Elliot Cadeau, who I think unequivocally is now the biggest key to whether or not Michigan can go to the Final Four and win a national championship in Indianapolis. Things change drastically for Michigan. It's not obviously a blow that cannot be absorbed. I should say this. It's not a blow that Michigan can't get through, but it is a blow. Michigan is not the same team as it was prior to the Illinois game, losing LJ Kaysen. Not in my opinion. I thought Kaysen was somebody who could keep defensive intensity at a high level. I thought Kaysen was somebody who could be a massive, massive reserve off the bench. And now what we're seeing is a completely different dynamic for Michigan off the bench here as we continue to go through, obviously, the things we're looking forward to this month. Want you to get in the chat. Want you to send me your questions, your comments as we continue to look at the scenario that's going to unfold this March. I told you I'm looking forward to the idea of a potential rubber match between UConn and St. John's. I think, honestly, it is the only story right now in the Big East that's really resonating. I told you I'm looking at bid stealers between now and Selection Sunday during championship week, and I also told you I'm curious to see how Michigan responds. One thing I'm really excited about is for North Carolina to get Caleb Wilson back, and I'm curious to see how the Tar Heels then are able to elevate their potential ceiling in the NCAA tournament, because I don't think there was a player that I enjoyed watching more this season than Caleb Wilson at North Carolina. Caleb Wilson has missed the last couple of weeks. Caleb Wilson with that hand injury did not play, obviously, when North Carolina was in a situation where it beat Louisville earlier this week. Did not play, obviously, in the Virginia Tech game on Saturday night. But North Carolina and Hubert Davis are a team that lost Seth Trimble for a little over a month, lost Caleb Wilson for a couple of weeks, and is going to wake up on Sunday morning and be 23-6 with a game remaining against Clemson, and then obviously next Saturday's game against Duke at Cameron Indoor Stadium. Hubert Davis and his staff did a tremendous job with this team. Hubert Davis and the staff will be in a situation where they will enter the NCAA tournament with significantly better options in terms of their seeding than they did a year ago when they were in the first four in Dayton. So I'm really excited to see Caleb Wilson back in tow. He's a big man again that obviously is second to none. And the team, because of their front court primarily, that is starting to raise things to a different gear, and I talked about this a little bit on Thursday's show, is the defending national champion Florida Gators. And when you're asking me now about things that I'm excited about for March, I think another thing you have to put on the list is we have a real shot right now to have back-to-back national champions over a 4-year stretch. UConn did it in 23 and 24. And with the way Florida is playing now, I think you can make the argument without question that there is a more than reasonable chance that Florida can be in a situation where it wins a second straight national title under Todd Golden. Todd Golden is underrated as a coach. Underrated as a coach. I talked about it on Thursday's show. Won a national title last year. Now 59-10 in 2 years at Florida. Beat Arkansas by 34 points on Saturday night in Gainesville. That tied for the worst loss in John Calipari's Hall of Fame career. And now you have to look at what Florida is doing in terms of its march towards a better seed on Selection Sunday. Florida picked up its 10th Quad 1 win on Saturday night against Arkansas. The only teams who have more in college basketball are Duke, Michigan, and Arizona. And when you look at the end of Florida's schedule in the regular season, Florida is going to play a game at home, and they're going to also have a road game still at Kentucky. That's another Quad 1 opportunity. Florida is going to have 3 potential games in the SEC tournament. That's another Quad 1 opportunity that could happen 3 times over. So if Florida were to win against Kentucky at Rupp Arena, and Florida were to win the SEC tournament, Florida could add 4 more Quad 1 opportunities to its resume and 4 more Quad 1 wins. It would be very difficult to keep the Gators off the 1 line on Selection Sunday if all of that came to fruition. And that is what I'm looking at right now. I think if you look at the dynamics surrounding the top of the seeds in the NCAA tournament, Duke, Michigan, and Arizona are all locks to be 1 seeds on Selection Sunday. But with that said, I think the stiffest competition now for UConn in the 1 line is the defending national champion Florida Gators. Iowa State lost again Saturday at home against Texas Tech, and kudos to Grant McCaslin for the coaching job he's doing after losing JT Toppin. Red Raiders are a whopping 3-0 since losing a player who I believe is a first-team All-American. Then you start to think about the scenario that's going on, obviously, in other places. Houston is coming off a 3-game losing streak, got back on track against Colorado on Saturday. That obviously adds some air in the tires. And then I think Purdue is a team, again, that is limping to the finish line a bit. 2 losses at home in the last 3 games. Granted, they were against Michigan and Michigan State. But I think the main challenger now for UConn on the 1 line on Selection Sunday is going to be the defending national champion Florida Gators. UConn beat Florida earlier this season as part of the Jimmy V Classic at Madison Square Garden, but now we're in a scenario where things are going to look a lot different. And one thing, too, because I am somebody who obviously wants to sample all of this at the highest of levels. Championship week is where you really start to see the dark side of March. And championship week is something that I have always been fond of. But I got to tell you, and I can't say this enough, we have certain teams in certain leagues winning their conferences by a large margin. Belmont did it in the Missouri Valley. Liberty did it in Conference USA, and congratulations to all those teams. But the dynamic in college basketball completely shifted a couple of years ago, in my opinion, when we saw all these changes in the postseason NIT. And I don't want to bring this up to make all, obviously, these amplified pressure statements on these coaches in these mid-major leagues, but I am going to say this. When the postseason NIT went away from Madison Square Garden, and the postseason NIT stopped guaranteeing the regular season champion an automatic qualifier to the postseason NIT, the ilk of that event, in my opinion, went away in a large, large way. And also the pressure then on these favorites in these mid-major conference tournaments is immense. And that is why we are going to have great theater starting with championship week. And we're going to have a number of championship week games, get going here in the next, 7 to 9 days. Heck, a week from today is going to be Arch Madness and the championship game on CBS, considering it's now Sunday at 12:24 a.m. So this is all coming down the pike. The pressure on these mid-major coaches who have won leagues in convincing fashion. Casey Alexander at Belmont, Richie McKay at Liberty. All these guys have done incredible jobs dominating their league. But if you're in a scenario where you do not obviously have your best 3 days in March, you are going from ecstasy to agony. And it happens like that. Like that. Speaking of a mid-major team on the bubble that needs to continue to rev up its engine, Santa Clara out of the West Coast Conference was one of the few bubble teams that obviously did the job on Saturday. Santa Clara beat Oregon State. I still think Santa Clara needs to get to the title game of the West Coast Conference tournament to truly feel comfortable about making the NCAA tournament for the first time under Herb Sunday. Want to get to your questions, though, here in the chat. Want to be in a situation where I hear from you. Jon Rothstein here on Inside College Basketball Now. This is March. The chat is bleeding right now at epic proportions, like it's Stallone in Rambo 3 after he just got wounded trying to save Richard Crenna. Okay. Let's go right now. Who wants to start this off right now? A lot of Gators fans in here. A lot of happy March comments. The line should be, this is March. B. Nolan 2000. Could you not argue that Tommy Houck is the SEC Player of the Year? I am going to go with Darius Acuff. I think Darius Acuff has had a better season. I know Florida is obviously going to finish higher than Arkansas, but I am going to go with Darius Acuff over Tommy Houck in the SEC Player of the Year race. We'll see how things obviously finish, but Acuff to me slightly over Houck. I will have both, though, as All-Americans. Matthew Page, 8358 says, John, what about a same national championship, John, as last year? Well, if you're talking about Florida against Houston, I have a lot of confidence right now in Florida that it can get to the Final Four, that it can get in a situation where we'll play again for a national championship. Houston, because of its limitations up front, gives me a little bit of pause. And Houston, to be in a scenario where it's not a 1 seed, it's going to have a tougher road than it's had the past couple of seasons. We have to remember, Houston was a 1 seed in 2023. In 2024, in 2025 under Kelvin Sampson. Houston in 2023 was a 1 seed, lost to Miami, who went to the Final Four. 2024 lost to Duke in the Sweet 16. That's when Jamal Shed went out with an ankle injury in the Sweet 16. And last year went to the national title game and lost to Florida. So we need to see the brackets, and we need to see if Houston has a geographic advantage in the South region. But I would have more confidence in Florida today than I have with Houston getting back to the national championship game. This is from Jazzy Maximus. John, do you think North Carolina will have connectivity issues with Caleb Wilson not having been able to play him for so long? Look, Caleb Wilson to me is the type of player that can seamlessly connect with his teammates when he gets back into the lineup. I think he's that type of player. But I also think it's encouraging, and this is part of what happens when injuries obviously happen, that North Carolina is able to expand its bench when Wilson and other players were out of the lineup. Look, Zayden High is a much better player and going to be a much better player now than before Caleb Wilson's injury. That's something that Hubert Davis and folks can build on. But North Carolina's got 2 regular season games left. I think it's really, really important, no matter how many games it is between now and Selection Sunday, that the Tar Heels get some of that rust off Caleb Wilson, because Caleb Wilson is going to need to get some of that rust off before the NCAA tournament. But I also think it's impressive. North Carolina, without Caleb Wilson, has been able to win conference games. North Carolina beat Louisville without Caleb Wilson. Louisville's comfortably in the bracket. North Carolina beat Virginia Tech, a bubble team who needed this win as a quad one opportunity without Caleb Wilson. North Carolina won at Syracuse without Caleb Wilson. There's something to be said for the growth of the people around him when you're able to win games like that in conference play. Young Wiz 6495 says, John, does Tommy Lloyd make his first Final Four this year? It's definitely trending that way. Arizona geographically is going to be in a great position to advance to the Final Four. San Diego, then San Jose. Look, Tommy Lloyd has done yeoman's work as Arizona's head coach since taking over for Sean Miller. His first year, Arizona was a 1 seed, lost to Houston in the Sweet 16. His second year, Arizona was a 2 seed, lost to Princeton. Third year, Arizona went to the Sweet 16, lost to Clemson. Last year went to the Sweet 16. He's been in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament 3 times in 4 years. Sooner or later, you're going to break through. And Tommy Lloyd, again, is somebody who consistently knows just by being at bat, he'll be in a situation where he'll be able to achieve that. When Koa Pete came back today against Kansas, this is what I saw. The totality of Arizona's front court, with Pete, with Krivosh, with Awaka, is an impossible matchup for most front courts. And Arizona has also in the last week gotten seamless basketball from Braden Burries, who doesn't have a turnover in his last 2 games, and he's shooting at an exceptionally high percentage. It's a balanced team, and we can sit here right now on March 1st, and yes, this is March, and give you scenarios where obviously you can say Arizona's going to a Final Four, Florida's going to a Final Four. You don't know until you see the bracket, because the bottom line is this. A 5th team, UConn or Florida, is not going to be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So that means one of the 4 other teams that's a 1 seed, either one of the teams I just mentioned, or Arizona, Michigan, or Duke, are going to have to go through one of those teams to get to a Final Four. That's not an easy proposition. B. Nolan 2000 says, can Christian Anderson carry Texas Tech to an Elite 8? I could see a Sweet 16. I don't know about an Elite 8, but I got to tell you, nobody, and I mean nobody in college basketball is doing a better coaching job right now than Grant McCasland. Nobody. It is amazing what Texas Tech is doing right now, obviously, without JT Toppin. That is something I think that is an amazing, amazing thing. Amazing, amazing thing. But we'll see how it all comes out in the wash. There's a lot of basketball left to be played. A lot of games that are left to be played. It's going to be really interesting. Really interesting. Let's take a couple more right here. The Lemur says, how far does Virginia fall after the performance at Duke today? I mean, I'm not so concerned with Virginia falling in the polls after losing at Cameron Indoor Stadium. I'm thinking about more in terms of the potential NCAA tournament seeds. Look, it's a quad 1 loss. It's obviously a loss that, you'd rather not have. But Duke is playing better ball than anybody in the country right now. And I don't think we're talking enough about Duke's defense. Over the last 10 games, Duke is holding its opponents to about 57 points per game. Only one of those opponents has scored better than 65 points. It was North Carolina in Chapel Hill. The defense of Duke, with the length on the perimeter of Caleb Foster, the positional size, and obviously the physicality you get up front with Brown, with Gongba, with Boozer, is second to none. And Duke's another one of those teams, and rightfully so, because it's going to be set up to be a 1 seed, that is going to have a geographic advantage in the NCAA tournament with Greenville and with Washington, D.C. I was debating, obviously, entering today's game, whether or not Ryan Odom could push Jon Scheyer for ACC Coach of the Year. Now I think Scheyer is a lock. A lock. And anytime you're Duke and you have the infrastructure to be successful, you are not going to get probably the credit that you deserve as a head coach. Jon Scheyer lost Tyrese Proctor, Sion James, Con Knippel, Cooper Flagg, and Common Malawach from last year's team that went to the Final Four and lost to Houston. 5 starters, and is 27-2. And is now in a situation where he's going to be the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament, barring something crazy. We can't speak enough about the coaching job this guy has done following Mike Krzyzewski. And you never want to be the guy who to follow the guy. Jon Scheyer has passed that test admirably, and it will be interesting to see if he now, in what is just going to be his, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, fourth year as a head coach, can get that elusive national championship. Let's take a few more questions before we get out of here. A10 favorite to win the Terry. That's easy. It's St. Louis. I will say this, though. I talked about the Mountain West being obviously a conference that could have a bid stealer. The Atlantic 10 is another conference that could have a bid stealer. St. Louis has obviously dominated this conference. St. Louis improved to 26-3 on Saturday with a win over Duquesne. But St. Louis is also a team that has looked a bit wobbly over the last couple of weeks because of the scenario, losing games to Rhode Island, losing a game also, to Dayton. St. Louis looks a little bit more vulnerable than it did a week ago. I would keep an eye on VCU. I would keep an eye on St. Joe's and also GW in that league. VCU, obviously the best team. VCU just outside the bubble right now, but the A10 is another league where we could have bid stealers for sure. One more question. Braden Burcham says, what is Kansas's ceiling? Look, on a neutral court with Darren Peterson, Kansas is going to boast the player that has the highest long-term ceiling in the sport. I just have not seen Kansas look truly connected on a consistent basis this year. And that makes sense because Kansas has had its best player and the player with the highest long-term ceiling in college basketball in and out of the lineup. Bill Self has coached 2 teams this year. But with that said, Kansas had its biggest win a couple of weeks ago against Arizona at Allen Fieldhouse without Darren Peterson in the lineup. I'm not saying that Kansas is a better team without Darren Peterson, but the rhythm, the chemistry, the role allocation, and eliminating a distraction, there's something to be said for that. The Big 12, in terms of its capabilities for the NCAA tournament, got dealt a really tough hand here the past couple of weeks because Richie Saunders went down for BYU, and also Texas Tech lost JT Toppin. I know Grant McCaslin is doing this with smoke and mirrors. It's incredibly impressive. Incredibly impressive. But some of these teams that had big injuries are teams that are going to be ripe to be picked off early in the NCAA tournament. I don't feel that way right now about Texas Tech. I'm starting to about BYU, who lost to West Virginia on Saturday. Another team that's going to be in the NCAA tournament that I could see myself picking against early, Iowa. Bennett Sturtz is on an island by himself like Tom Hanks in Castaway, and there is not a lot of help to get him off that island. Want to remind you that Inside College Basketball Now will be coming to you Mondays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. Both days this week we're on CBS Sports Network. And in addition to those shows, we will be bringing you exclusive episodes with some of the biggest and best names in the sport. Subscribe to Inside College Basketball Now on Apple and Spotify. We want to be your Bible for the college basketball season and beyond. We are the only college basketball podcast coming to you 52 weeks out of the calendar year. We sleep in May. This is March. I'm Jon Rothstein, and this was Inside College Basketball Now.